Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Wioya. Chapter 119. Demon Sword. Part 1. If you agree to join me, I will give you one of the legendary demon swords, the Evil Commandment Sword. Murmur murmur. At the Shadow Master's words, the crowd stirred. The Evil Commandment Sword? Yes. He said the demon sword, Evil Commandment Sword. That was in the Shadow Master's possession? Oh my. It wasn't just the warriors wearing the red belts of Corpse Blood Valley who were astonished like this. Even the executives who had their backs turned looked at the Shadow Master with surprised eyes. Even the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, who was confident no matter what proposal the Shadow Master made, had his eyes wavering at the mention of the Evil Commandment Sword. At this, Mok Jiangun swept his eyes around and wondered. He had only mentioned a single sword, so why were they reacting like this? Huh. The Evil Commandment Sword. Then, Chong Ryong's voice reached Mok Jiangun's ears. She also seemed quite surprised, as her voice was filled with excitement. Curious about her reaction, Mok Jiangun tried sending a silent message, focusing on the wooden puppet at his chest. Do you know what the Evil Commandment Sword is? Huh? It was a doubtful silent message. But she replied in a surprised voice. How in the world did you do that? Ah. It's called a silent message. I thought it might work, and it seems you can hear it. Even though she was sealed in the wooden puppet, it seemed possible because this was also a method of transmitting sound. When did you learn this? The Summoning Sound Valley Master over there taught me. I see you learned it from that flirtatious wench who uses sound techniques. Yes. I think I've heard of it. There are some among the Shaolin monks who know how to use this method. Anyway, why are you and everyone else so surprised? At Mok Jiangun's question, Chong Ryong clicked her tongue. However, since Mok Jiangun barely knew anything about the martial world, it was right to explain it to him. Among the blacksmiths who make weapons, there are those who are called master craftsmen. The weapons made by them gain fame and are called famous swords or unrivaled weapons. I think I've heard of them. Like the Heaven Reliant Sword, Ganjiang, or Moyi, right? Yeah. That's it. What? Ganjiang and Moyi. Ganjiang and Moyi? Yes. Those are called famous swords, but they are also known as demon swords. I didn't know that. Mok Jiangun learned writing and scholarship through his grandfather. In his studies, he heard various ancient tales and only knew that Ganjiang and Moyi were made by heating a furnace with Moyi's hair and nails at the request of King Helu of Wu. Do you know who the master of Ganjiang and Moyi was? Master? Could it be Oh? Yes. The Evil Commandment Sword was made by their master, the great craftsman Oyezi. At those words, Mok Jiangun's eyes glinted with interest. That was because if it was Oyezi, he was known as the greatest craftsman of his time and even to this day. The great craftsman Oyezi. Even now, the swords that could be called the best were made during the spring and autumn period, and half of those famous swords were made by the great craftsman Oyezi of the Yu Kingdom. The legendary famous swords such as Great Destroyer, Juk, Black, Zhanlu, Purity, Chuanjuan, Victory over Evil, Xingxia, Fish Belly, Yucheng, Dragon Gulf, Long Yuan, Great Riverbank, Tai, and Artisanal Display, Gongbu were all born from his hands. These were famous swords that anyone with a little education would know, as there were many well-known anecdotes and tales about them. That's interesting. Oh Yezi. But I don't think I've heard of the Evil Commandment Sword before. That's to be expected. Those were the swords Oyezi wanted to keep hidden. He wanted to keep them hidden? Literally. There was a strange legend circulating among craftsmen a long time ago. What strange legend? The legend that if you make a sword using the flesh and blood of a living human as an offering, the greatest famous sword will be born. Making a sword with a living human? For ordinary people, it would be a story that not only gave them goosebumps but also made them express shock. However, at those words, the corners of Mok Jiangun's mouth curved up. That's cool. What? No, it's nothing. So, is that evil commandment sword made by offering a living human? That's not known for certain. In the historical records of ancient times, there is a record that Oyezi succeeded in melting the Guanya black iron, which was said to be unmeltable, and made a few unknown demon swords. At her words, Mok Jiangan asked in wonder. You're calling it a demon sword, not a famous sword. There's a reason it's called that. It's... As she was about to answer, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, stepped forward and said, The evil commandment sword? How is it that you, Sir Shadow Master, have it? At his question, the Shadow Master covered his mouth and replied, Oh ho ho. Somehow, I was fortunate enough to acquire it not long ago. You see, I have a personal hobby of collecting famous weapons. Collecting? Yes. Didn't I give your eldest disciple, Grand Elder Wu Horang, the famous fierce tiger blade that I had in my possession? At those words, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, recalled an event from 6 years ago. As a gift for his eldest disciple Wu Horang becoming a Grand Elder, the Shadow Master had given him the famous blade Fierce Tiger Blade, Hogol. The Fierce Tiger Blade was a famous blade made by Muhate, who was known as the most talented craftsman of his time, possessing a sharpness that could cut through even giant rocks with a single stroke. It was a blade that suited Wu Horang perfectly. I'm still grateful for that. But what you're talking about now is a demon sword. Isn't it literally a cursed sword? Cursed? What does that mean? As he wondered, the Shadow Master shrugged his shoulders and said it was fine. It's just a sword that hasn't found its owner. To the chosen owner, it's an endless famous sword. Isn't there a clear example of that? Like the renowned cleaving sword of Wei Tak-hyun, the Vice Alliance leader of the Righteous Alliance. At those words, the crowd stirred once again. Wei Tak-hyun, the Vice Alliance leader of the Righteous Alliance. He was one of the 8 stars of the 6 heavens and 8 stars and was known as one of the top 5 swordsmen in the current martial world. However, the reason they were surprised wasn't because of this peerless master named Wei Tak-hyun. Sun Yun frowned and said, Are you saying that without knowing how the previous owners of that renowned cleaving sword all died of illness within half a year? That's right. The renowned cleaving sword, another demon sword known to have been made by the great craftsman Oyezi. Because of that sword, countless swordsmen engaged in bloody conflicts, and there were several instances where the owner changed. However, the owners who possessed this sword all died of illness within half a year without exception. That's too dangerous. But hasn't Wei Tak-hyun been fined for 15 years? Everyone died. However, there was a single exception, Wei Tak-hyun, the Vice Alliance leader of the Righteous Alliance, one of the 8 stars, known as the Sword of Satisfaction. He is a peerless master who has surpassed the wall. He's different from the previous owners. With those words, Sun Yun looked at Mok Jiangan. No matter how outstanding his talent was, he still considered him an unpolished gem. Giving a demon sword to such an unpolished gem was a dangerous act. Demon swords aren't called demon swords for nothing. If you really want to entice this child, it would be better to replace it with another collected item. Alright. What? In an instant, at Mok Jiangan's words, Sun Yun furrowed his brows. What did this guy just say? Did he not properly hear why he said that demon sword was dangerous? As he was thinking that, Mok Jiangan said, If I go with the Shadow Master, you're saying you'll give me that sword called the Evil Commandment Sword, right? You? Could this guy possibly be coveting it just because it was made by the great craftsman Oyezi? At this, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, dissuaded him with a somewhat heavy expression. Listen, child. That's not a sword you should covet yet. It's not a sword I should covet? At this question, Sun Yun clicked his tongue and said, It's not to belittle you. As I said earlier, a demon sword is literally a demon sword. You seem to be taking my words lightly because you're young and have a strong desire, but it's not a sword to approach with idle greed or curiosity. This was a sincere warning from Sun Yun. Although Oyezi's demon swords gained attention due to Ita Qian, just 15 years ago, four owners lost their lives because of it. Considering the case of the renowned cleaving sword Sun Yun believed the evil commandment sword would be no different. What do you think? Mok Jiang'an sent a silent message to Chang Ryong. Then, she replied. His words aren't unreasonable. What do you mean by that? Even before I died, the martial world was engulfed in a storm of blood because of the great craftsman Oyezi's demon swords. It seems there's more than one. Yes. It's not known exactly how many there are, but a few are known. Renowned cleaving sword, fear-killing sword, evil commandment sword. Although she was dead, the memories were still vivid. 3 swords were discovered in a collapsed royal tomb by a local official and a wealthy merchant. Those 3 swords brought a storm of blood to the martial world at that time. Recalling this, she soon said, "To be honest, if it were before I died, I would have definitely told you not to covet that demon sword. What about now? If there is a vengeful spirit in the demon sword, it could also become a source of power for you." This was Chang Ryong's honest opinion. Mok Jiang'an had already absorbed Chang Ryong's energy, the gu poison, and even the spiritual beast level Imi Mangniang, who were weakened due to being sealed, making it his own power. Considering this, no matter how notorious the demon sword was, she didn't think there would be something so tremendously dangerous to that extent. But you're not choosing the Shadow Master because of the demon sword, are you? At Chang Ryong's question, Mok Jiang'an smiled faintly. Of course, that wasn't the reason. Although he was interested in the so-called demon sword, it wasn't enough to change his planned objective. However, that's not the reason, but it turned out to be a coincidence. You, mortal. She had been continuously advising him to choose one of the 2 5 kings. It was because being close to someone in a high position would allow him to get closer to the core. But Mok Jiang'an's thoughts were different. The Shadow Clan plays the role of shadows, handling information and intelligence, right? Mortal. I know you have a lot of interest in things like information, but once you reach a high position, such things will naturally. While she was speaking, the Shadow Master opened his mouth again. Oh ho ho. The Bright Blade King's words also have a point. Indeed, it's true that demon swords are somewhat dangerous, but since it's also a famous sword made by the great craftsman Oyezi, I offered it to win that child's favor. At those words, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, softly said, "You fought well." He thought the Shadow Master had taken a step back. However, but it's a bit awkward to withdraw what I've said in front of everyone watching, isn't it? What? Then, how about this? What if we let that child hold the evil commandment sword once and see if he has the potential to become its owner? At the Shadow Master's words, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun's expression twisted. He had said that demon swords were dangerous and shouldn't be given, but now he was going further and suggesting to let him hold it, as if he was taking his words lightly. Shadow Master, coincidentally, I happened to bring the sword with me. You brought the sword? What do you mean by that? Snap. The Shadow Master snapped his fingers. Then, the martial artists who seemed to be from the Shadow Clan, dressed in black and waiting behind the platform, ran off somewhere. Soon after, they carefully brought back a long wooden box, carried by 2 people on a wooden plank. Everyone's attention was focused on the wooden box, which appeared to be the exact length of a sword. Why in the world did you bring this? The Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, asked in an incomprehensible tone. It was already a dangerous sword. He couldn't understand why it was brought all the way to Corpse Blood Valley. At that question, the Shadow Master smiled slightly, clasped his hands together, bowed his waist, and replied, "I apologize, but I cannot answer that question, so please understand." Understand? Are you avoiding my question now? The Bright Blade King, Sun Yun's voice was filled with anger. His energy was surging, as if he was ready to have a showdown at any moment. No choice, I guess. At this, the Shadow Master approached Sun Yun and whispered something in his ear. Then, Sun Yan's eyes, which had been filled with anger, narrowed. Sun Yan also said something softly. In that way, the whispered conversation between the two went back and forth a few times. Then, the Shadow Master said in an audible voice, "What do you think?" At those words, Sun Yan remained silent for a moment before replying, "If it becomes a problem, I will have it confiscated at any time." That's perfectly reasonable. What in the world did the Shadow Master say that made the Bright Blade King, Sun Yan, suddenly change his attitude? As he was wondering, the Shadow Master turned his head to Mok Jiangan and said, "Oh ho ho. That took a bit long. Anyway, since the Bright Blade King also gave his advice, it seems difficult to simply give you this sword, so would you like to hold it once?" With those words, the Shadow Master nodded to his subordinates. Then, a warrior opened the tightly closed lid of the wooden box. The executives who were already curious about the evil commandment sword got up from their seats, turned their bodies, and looked at it. However, inside the opened wooden box, there was another wooden box. And on the outside of that wooden box, numerous talismans were stuck all over. Seeing this, Mok Jiangan's eyes sparkled. It might not be visible to the eyes of others, but to Mok Jiangan's eyes, an ominous demonic energy was leaking out through the gaps where the talismans were attached. It really seems to be a demon sword. If it weren't for the talismans, the energy would have been even more exposed on the surface. The Shadow Master pointed to this wooden box with his hand and said, "Take it out and hold it yourself. If the sword chooses you, I will give you that instead of a substitute. Of course, on the premise that you come to the Shadow Clan." At his words, Mok Jiangan walked forward. And he placed his hand on the wooden box, which was covered in talismans. The Bright Blade King, Sun Yan's eyes watching this turned peculiar. He recalled what the Shadow Master had said just before. "It's difficult to say why I brought it, but let me tell you something interesting." Something interesting? I also found out only after obtaining this, but that sword makes human desires surface. It makes desires surface? What do you mean by that? Literally. It makes you unable to control your own desires. How could you bring such a dangerous thing? Aren't you curious? What the true desire of that child who defected to our sect is? Mok Jiangan's true desire. Would the evil commandment sword really reveal that desire as the Shadow Master said? Chapter 120. Demon Sword. Part 2. Mok Jiangan's hand was reaching towards the wooden box covered in talismans. That sword makes human desires surface. It makes desires surface? What do you mean by that? Literally. It makes you unable to control your own desires. Aren't you curious? What the true desire of that child who defected to our sect is? Mok Jiangan's true desire. Since desire is a deep wish, it was akin to one's actual inner thoughts. Even the Bright Blade King, Sun Yan, was curious about it. Although he had declared his defection, Sun Yan didn't really believe it was genuine. There was a high probability that he did it to avoid the current situation. Then, what was that fellow's true objective? Creak. The lid of the wooden box covered in talismans opened under Mok Jiangan's hand. As the lid opened, the evil commandment sword wrapped in a leather scabbard was revealed. The moment he tried to take a closer look, Sun Yan felt goosebumps on his arm from something strange that stimulated his five senses. Flinch. What is this? It's a feeling that can't be explained. This was felt not through spirit perception, but it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it stimulated the five senses, no, the sixth sense. That subtle ominousness one might feel when walking alone on a dark night path. It was as if it had been maximized. Is this what they call a demon sword? It's clearly different from those called famous swords or famous blades. Those didn't have this unpleasant feeling from the beginning, but this stimulated the senses even while wrapped in leather. The Shadow Master, who had been observing Mok Jiangan's reaction more closely than the contents inside, had a glint of interest in his eyes. He had already seen it. That's why he knew that most people would be engulfed in a strange sensation the moment they saw that sword for the first time. However, Mok Jaeongun's reaction was different from what he expected. Mok Jaeongun was unaffected. Rather, he was looking at the sword and the scabbard with interest. An indescribably strange ominousness was emanating from that demon sword, yet he showed such a reaction, so he truly wasn't ordinary. "How is it?" Chong Ryong asked Mok Jaeongun. Being sealed in a wooden puppet, it was difficult for her to discern the external energy. At her question, Mok Jaeongun's eyes narrowed. "It's different." Different? The energy Mok Jaeongun was looking at was similar to the demonic energy of the two demonic beauties, but also resembled the ominous spiritual energy of vengeful spirits. It was a complex energy that he had never felt before. At this, Mok Jaeongun's lips curled up as if he found it interesting. "I think I'll know if I touch it directly." The ominous energy emanating from the sword was tempting him. It was telling him to remove the scabbard and grasp its hilt. If it wants, I should oblige, right? Mok Jaeongun grasped the scabbard and lifted the evil commandment sword. And with his right hand, he gripped the hilt. At the same time, shing! He freed the sword from the leather scabbard. Ooh! Is that the evil commandment sword? Ah! It's indeed a precious sword. Exclamations poured out from here and there. With a small groove carved near the center of the hilt and a unique pattern drawn on the blade, it was as if looking at a work of art. Half of the blade was black, and the other half was white, adding to the antique and beautiful atmosphere. Gulp! Sun Yun, who got to see it up close, unknowingly swallowed his saliva. The moment he saw the sword, greed arose from deep within his heart without him realizing it. Even though he wasn't a swordsman. However, in that instant, Sun Yun drew up his true energy and gathered his senses. Demon sword, it's definitely a demon sword. For someone like him who had no interest in swords to feel greed the moment he saw a sword, it was truly a strange occurrence. If one were to be bewitched by it, a great disaster would unfold. Sun Yun looked around. This? As expected, the concerns he had came to fruition. Some of the warriors of Corpse Blood Valley and those brought by the executives were walking over with blank eyes as if they were possessed by something. Judging this situation to be dangerous, Sun Yun infused his true energy and let out a shout. Roar! 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 At the same time, Sun Yun's shout spread out in all directions like an echo. This intense shout infused with true energy was none other than the lion's roar. As Sun Yun's lion's roar resonated throughout the entire plaza, those who had been momentarily possessed by desire as if bewitched by something all covered their ears at once. Ugh! My ears? They weren't the only ones who regained their senses after being shaken by the tremendous shout. Huh? What is this? The two grand elders also unknowingly half rose from their chairs for a moment, then gathered their senses with perplexed expressions while circulating their energy. It was a moment when they directly experienced the power of the demon sword they had only heard about. Still, it ended at this level because they didn't personally hold it. Mok Jaeongun? Sun Yun looked at Mok Jaeongun with worried eyes. However, contrary to his concerns, Mok Jaeongun was looking at the sword with indifferent eyes. What's this? There wasn't a hint of greed in those eyes. The Shadow Master also found this strange. What is it? He had already seen his subordinates being possessed by desire several times after grasping that sword. Didn't he himself also reveal the desires he had hidden the moment he grasped it? Shadow Master, how could you? Did I say such a thing? He still couldn't forget the expression his dead subordinate had made. It was truly a regrettable incident. That demon sword was a genuinely dangerous sword. The Shadow Master had obtained what he had longed for, but he decided to give up his desire to collect it. It was an uncontrollable demon. There's no way he doesn't have desires. Even he, who prided himself on having a strong willpower, had revealed the desires he had hidden because of that demon. However, no matter how outstanding Mok Jaeongun's talent was, there was no way a greenhorn like him could endure the power of that demon. right at that moment. Thud. Mok Jayangun's eyes closed, and his head tilted back. Seeing this, the Shadow Master muttered with gleaming eyes, as expected. There was no way he wouldn't be captivated by the demon sword. Mortal? Mortal? Chong Ryong called out to Mok Jayangun, who had suddenly lost consciousness. She didn't know what was happening. He had said it was a unique energy and that he would try absorbing it through the ritual of binding, but he suddenly lost consciousness. Just what was going on? Asterisk. Zhang ran. After running for a while and reaching the top of the mountain, Zhang frowned. He saw black smoke there. The place where the smoke was rising from was where the house was located. Seeing this, Zhang threw the water jug and ran like crazy towards that place. Soon, he arrived there. Crackle crackle. The scorching heat was felt. The house was burning fiercely. Zhang's face stiffened terribly. Zhang, who was hurriedly looking around, ran to the back of the burning house. There was a small vegetable garden in the backyard. Normally, his grandfather would wake up early in the morning and pick medicinal herbs in the vegetable garden. Please, please. Zhang, who ran to the vegetable garden, stopped in his tracks. Through his eyes that had widened as if they would burst, he saw something stained with blood. Things that should be inside the body were scattered in the vegetable garden. Nash. Zhang gritted his teeth. And he followed the trail of blood and fragments. Looking down the hill, Zhang shouted. Grandfather! His grandfather was there. The sight of his grandfather with only the upper body remaining, the lower part torn away, was indescribably horrible. Zhang's face, looking at this, was distorted like a demon, along with sadness. The killing intent that had been pressing deep in his chest filled his mind. No. At that moment, everything stopped. The killing intent from revenge, this isn't your fundamental desire. The entity examining the memory shook its head. Revenge could also become a desire, but this wasn't the desire that this person fundamentally possessed. Show me your true desire. It wanted to see the desire closest to the purest origin. That desire was the very reason for its existence. You're truly peculiar. Who blocked the origin of your desire? It dug deep into the depths of the mind and discovered a huge wall filling all sides. The moment it saw this wall, it didn't hide its bewilderment. Strong willpower was sometimes projected in this way as a wall. However, this didn't seem to be created by the will of Mok Jayangun, no, the one called Zhang, but rather planted by someone. To erect a wall of lamentation in another person's mind. How truly strange. An artificially created wall. Here, a strong emotion beyond the sadness and vengeance seen earlier was felt. This was blocking the origin of this fellow named Zhang. However, once this seemingly impenetrable wall of lamentation was shattered, the origin of desire that had been accumulating would pour out. I will open this for you. The wall of lamentation that seemed like it would never open. However, it had the ability to open even this. There was no need to break the wall. If the nature of the wall was changed so that it would naturally flow out. Slither. The wall was meant to become a path. It was right at that moment. Whoosh. Something began to pour out from a part of the wall that had become a path. It was darkness? Deep darkness. It was difficult to even see it as a fragment of desire. What in the world is this? How could such deep darkness be lurking inside a human? It began to feel ecstasy upon seeing this. It thought it was close to the high-purity desire it had been searching for. It entrusted its spiritual body to the pouring darkness. If it absorbed this and became one, an individual of sword human unity made solely of the high-purity desire it had longed for would be born. Now, let's become one. It tried to assimilate with this darkness. However, at that moment, it realized that this darkness wasn't simple. It wasn't high-purity darkness. This was turbidity itself, dizzying enough to make one lose their mind. This turbidity that seemed to destroy everything was Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Swish. Mok Jiangun, who had his head tilted back, slowly raised it. The bright blade king, Sun Yun, carefully observed Mok Jiangun. It was clear that he was possessed by the demon sword, but what kind of desire he had would soon. Pitch black eyes like black jade. They were like an endless abyss. What happened to his eyes? Is that the state of desires being expressed? Something was strange. At that moment, one of the Grand Elders, the Flame Demon Grand Elder Bo Hyukso, shouted at Mok Jiangun. You bastard! Come to your senses! Judging by Mok Jiangun's condition, it seemed like he was definitely captivated by the demon sword. Thinking that he needed to be awakened immediately, Bo Hyukso hurriedly tried to separate the demon sword from Mok Jiangun's hand. Right at that moment. Swish! Bo Hyukso grabbed his own neck. Then, he widened his eyes and broke out in a cold sweat like someone under immense tension. Just what was he doing? Bo Hyukso's eyes were trembling like crazy. Seeing his appearance, the bright blade king, Sun Yun, wondered what was happening, and the moment he met Mok Jiangun's eyes. Huh? In an instant, it was as if time had passed quickly, the sky turned red and then darkened, and the ground all around was stained with sticky blood. It was definitely the same place. However, all the people around had their necks cut or various parts of their bodies torn off, screaming in agony. Every being breathing within this plaza was suffering a horrible death or agonizing in the face of it. What in the world? What was happening? As he was engrossed in questions and looking around. Crackle crackle. The bodies of those who were dead or dying all began to burn at once. The red and crimson flames soon turned blue, gradually darkening from purple, and ultimately transformed into black flames. Crackle crackle crackle. These black flames quickly became a fire demon and tried to devour everything around. Surprised by this, the bright blade king, Sun Yun, tried to leap back to avoid it. However, I can't move. His body wouldn't move as if someone was holding him. He couldn't understand what was going on. Crackle crackle crackle. The black flames that had devoured everything around had grown enormous and tried to swallow him. Although Sun Yun wasn't greatly afraid of death, it was so eerie that he unknowingly closed his eyes for a moment. In an instant, silence came and nothing could be heard. Then, swish! Soon, the surroundings brightened, and the bright blade king, Sun Yun, opened his closed eyes. However, no? The plaza that had been devoured and burned by black flames had somehow returned to normal, and the flame demon Grand Elder, Bo Hyukso, was seen drenched in cold sweat with heavy breathing. But that wasn't all. The Shadow Master also seemed shocked by something, looking around with surprised eyes. It was as if he had also seen something. While that was happening, clang clang clang. A strange resonance sound that hurt the ears spread from somewhere. This sound is? The source of it was none other than the demon sword, Evil Commandment Sword. The blade of the Evil Commandment Sword was trembling wildly on its own, and this resonance sound seemed to be coming from the groove carved in the middle. It was as if the sword was in agony. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. This can't be, this is chaos itself. It trembled in fear, swept away by the chaos-like darkness. It had tried to become one with this origin, but it felt like it would be devoured by it instead. While that was happening, whoosh! In an instant, the overflowing darkness was rewound as if time was going backward, and Mok Jiangun, no, Zhang, was sitting in front of the pierced wall of lamentation with his chin resting on his hand. Dash! Seeing his appearance, it trembled even more crazily. Fear, dread. These emotions were the byproducts of humans that it had never felt before. But just what was that? At this, Zhang wiggled his index finger and clicked his tongue, saying, "Not yet." Snap! With those words, he lightly flicked his finger. Then, the will of that entity, no, the will of the Evil Commandment Sword that had dug into his psyche, disappeared from this space as if it had been extinguished. Sizzle! Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Soon, Mok Jayanun's eyes, which had turned black like black jade, returned to normal. As if nothing had happened. Mok Jayanun, who had regained his senses, frowned and then looked around. Huh? However, starting from the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, to the Shadow Master and the other executives, they were all looking at him with serious expressions. Chapter 121. Demon Sword. Part 3. A white-haired man with his entire body bound in iron chains. Having been imprisoned for a long time, his long beard was unkempt. Looking at his face in the flickering torchlight, he appeared to be in his mid-30s at most, but his hair and beard had turned white. Despite being in an uncomfortable position due to the iron chains, the white-haired man's expression showed no change. It was as if he had no expression at all. Clink! The man slowly raised his head and looked at the moonlight visible through the iron bars. Tomorrow, his execution would be carried out. Would he then be able to understand the sensations of fear and dread? Those facing death all had expressions filled with agony. Would he end up like that too? Even at this moment facing death, he felt nothing. Why was he born like this? He didn't know. As he was pondering, a strong wind suddenly blew into the prison cell. Whoosh! Then, the torch illuminating the cell went out. What? The drowsy jailer's voice was heard as he got up. But soon, the sound of something collapsing on the floor followed. Thud. What is it? As he wondered, the sound of someone walking towards the cell filled with darkness was heard. It was the footsteps of one person. But when he looked ahead, he saw two figures in the darkness. Two people? Although his dantian was sealed, they were right in front of him, yet he couldn't sense their presence at all. They must be truly skilled martial artists. As he was thinking that, a small voice was heard. Cogaui, the Thousand Heads Tower, 1. The vicious man who beheaded 1,000 people and built a tower with their heads. Sufficient as material. Oh my! A sigh followed. Looking ahead, there was a monk with his hands behind his back, pointing at the cell, and an old man frowning and looking at him. In the moonlight, he could only tell that he was an old man, but this strange scent he smelled. The scent of charcoal and iron. A blacksmith? At the white-haired man's words, interest glinted in the old man's eyes. The old man stared at him intently and then spoke. Young man, why did you do such a thing? At the old man's question, the white-haired man, no, Cogaui, replied with an expressionless gaze. I don't know. You don't know? Then you just did it? I just wanted to know. Wanted to know? I wanted to know what emotions were. Emotions? Yes. He had none of the emotions of joy, anger, sorrow, or happiness. From a young age, he didn't know what they were, so he wanted to know those emotions. That was what he had desired most in his life. I just wanted to know what they were. A strange desire, different from ordinary people. Why did this desire lead to such a twisted end? If that was the reason, there were many other ways. Why did you do that to so many people? He couldn't finish his words. The severed heads by his hand all had expressions of despair and pain. He stacked them like a work of art to build a tower. Because fear and dread were easier than joy or happiness. Easier? In the face of death, everyone shows those emotions. Oh my! At his words, the old man clicked his tongue. Then he soon said, This old man finds it hard to understand you, young man. But if you have such a twisted desire and obsession, you have the qualifications. Qualifications? Don't you want to leave something behind in this world before you die, young man? What do you mean by that? As he wondered, the old man curled his lips and said, How about offering yourself for the birth of an unprecedented sword? Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Mok Jayanun looked at the evil commandment sword he was holding. He couldn't understand what had just happened. He tried to absorb the unique energy of the evil commandment sword through the ritual of binding, but as it was absorbed into his body, it instantly dug into his mind. Then, not long after, he regained his senses. What is this? Various memories that weren't his own were mixed up in his mind. Whose memories were these? Memories rose up in fragments, jumbled together. The most intense memory was Aarg. Along with the sight of jumping into molten iron, it was a horrific memory of his entire body melting. It seemed to have happened while he was alive, but what was strange about this scene was that even while suffering like this, he felt ecstasy. Why did he feel joy while facing such a terrible death? It was a truly peculiar memory. Huh? No. These fragmented memories. The only time emotions were revealed was the moment he faced death. After that, strangely, it wasn't his own memories but the memories of numerous people that were mixed together. Among them, the Shadow Clan Master? The Shadow Clan Master's appearance was also seen. It was just a fleeting fragment, but that memory was truly fascinating. As he was thinking that, a resonance sound came from the sword he was holding. Wung. Mok Jiangan looked at the evil commandment sword. Then, the evil commandment sword trembled, making a resonance sound. It looked as if it was trembling in fear and submitting. Seeing this, the corner of Mok Jiangan's mouth curled up. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. What in the world is this? The Shadow Clan Master looked around with surprised eyes. For a moment, he saw a scene where thousands and tens of thousands of swords overturned everything around, and everyone here became a hive of swords and died. As he was perplexed, looking at those who died like that, in an instant, the corpses were engulfed in black flames, and everything turned to ashes. Startled, he came to his senses and realized it was all an illusion. As if he had seen a phantom. Drip. The human skin mask was drenched in sweat, and the scene was so vivid. It felt like unstoppable destruction and chaos. Could one feel such heart-pounding fear from a mere illusion? Huff. Huff. Interest glinted in the Shadow Clan Master's eyes. Not only that, but all the executives around him had surprised faces as if they were possessed by something. Even the two great clan leaders, Bo Hyukso, grabbed their necks and let out rough breaths. Did they see a phantasm of their necks being cut? What is going on? The Shadow Clan Master felt bewildered by this strange situation. How could it be that not just one or two people, but everyone around him was seeing such illusions? The Shadow Clan Master looked at Mok Jiangan. His eyes trembled. Something was strange. He clearly saw Mok Jiangan's eyes turn smooth like black jade just a moment ago. But now they were perfectly fine. Could it be that even that was an illusion? What is this? The one holding the demon sword, evil commandment sword, was Mok Jiangan. But why did they see such illusions? He had let him hold the sword to find out what his desires were, but he didn't know why this happened. Could it be? As he was thinking that, Mok Jiangan lightly swung the sword. The crisp sound of the sword cutting through the air made the Shadow Clan Master's eyes widen. It was the same for the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun. You? He didn't know what that terrible illusion he had just seen was, but looking at Mok Jiangan now, it seemed as if he wasn't affected by the demon sword at all. Moreover, that ominous energy that had been felt from the sword was no longer there. At this, Sun Yun asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes. I'm fine." "He's fine?" At Mok Jiangan's words, Sun Yun furrowed his brows. Was he really fine? Looking at the executives around him, for a fleeting moment, they all had faces as if they had seen something illusory, just like him. This couldn't have happened by chance. "Can you give the sword to this king for a moment?" "The sword?" "Yes." The reason Sun Yun asked this question was simple. He knew various tales related to demon swords and knew that those captivated by them would become obsessed with the demon sword. So, if Mok Jiangan was truly chosen as the master by the demon sword and was unaffected, he thought he would readily hand it over. At that moment, here it is. Mok Jiangan readily placed his palm on the blade and politely brought the evil commandment sword with both hands. Seeing this, Sun Yun's eyes narrowed. Was this child really chosen by the evil commandment sword? I'll know if I hold it myself. Sun Yan reached out his hand towards the hilt of the evil commandment sword in Mok Jiangun's hands. Then, the Shadow Clan master hurriedly tried to stop him. Your Excellency, the Bright Blade King. It's fine. I'm just checking for a moment. At his words, the Shadow Clan master looked at him with concerned eyes. Of course, he knew for what purpose he was trying to hold the sword, but even he, who had reached the proficient stage transcendent realm, had lost his reason for a moment because of the sword. Even if the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, was a master who had reached the pinnacle stage of transcendent realm before the wall, it was just as dangerous. However, tap. Sun Yun grabbed the hilt and lifted it up, but nothing happened. The sword, which had seemed so ominous just a moment ago, was now shining with the light of an ordinary famous sword, modestly showing off its elegance. What? Where did that ominous energy go? The resonant sound was also not heard. Sun Yun, who had been lightly swinging the sword, looked at the Shadow Clan master with puzzled eyes. The Shadow Clan master also looked at the evil commandment sword with eyes that couldn't understand the situation. The sword that had troubled him so much after coming into his possession had become so docile. He truly couldn't understand it. Did that child really receive the evil commandment sword's choice? Seeing that nothing happened even when Sun Yun held it for a long time, it seemed that the evil commandment sword, which had chosen its master, had transformed from a demon sword to a famous sword. It was truly amazing. The Shadow Clan master exclaimed. Your Excellency, the Bright Blade King. It seems the true master of the evil commandment sword has been determined. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. In this way, Mok Jiangun obtained the legendary demon sword, evil commandment sword, made by the great craftsman Oyezi. In the process, the nearby executives saw strange illusions, but even though they found it questionable, they all kept silent as if they had made a promise. In fact, it was awkward to suddenly mention that everyone saw an illusion of reaching destruction at this gathering, and even though it was just a fleeting moment, it was also a blow to their pride to say that they were captivated by the demon sword's demonic energy. However, thanks to this, they realized one thing. If there ever came a time when they had to confront that child named Mok Jiangun, they must make sure to separate the evil commandment sword from his hands. There was nothing unusual at the moment, but they couldn't shake off the thought that it was somehow dangerous. It's regrettable. The Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, couldn't hide his disappointment at losing Mok Jiangun. Not the Thunderbolt Fist King, won by Hak, but he chose that Shadow Clan master. He never expected such a result to unfold just because of a demon sword. It was disappointing, but there was nothing he could do. I'll have to be satisfied with this child. The disciple the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, gained from the closing ceremony was none other than Mok Yuqion. Another child of the Yun Mok Sword Manor brought as a hostage. Of course, this wasn't his choice. It was entirely Mok Yuqion's choice. I want to become stronger. Stronger than that guy. It was what Mok Yuqion had said in front of the executives. That guy was none other than Mok Jiangun. At his words, most of the executives turned away. It was because they considered Mok Yuqion, who had learned the strange corpse technique, a ticking time bomb. However, the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, was the only one who didn't turn away. Rather, he said to Mok Yuqion, "You want to become stronger?" "Yes. If you follow this king's teachings well, I can make you so." At those words, Mok Yuqion chose him without hesitation. In fact, there was a hidden intention behind this. The Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, also didn't look favorably upon Mok Yuqion learning the strange evil techniques, but he accepted him as a disciple with Mok Jiangun in mind. In any case, there was no one else he had in mind as a disciple other than Mok Jiangun, so it could be said to be a card to prepare for contingencies. His value as a card to suppress that guy is sufficient. Mok Yuqion, who didn't know this, just wanted to become stronger. And he hadn't forgotten the request made by the Righteous Alliance's Silent Strides agent. His goal was to rise to the highest position possible here and regain his honor as a member of the Righteous faction. This child's talent is also not inferior to his, so I should have expectations. The Thunderbolt Fist King, Won Byung-hak, accepted Mu Jangyak as his disciple. Originally, he had his eye on Yun Muung of the Esoteric Realm Gate, but in terms of talent, Yun Muung wasn't even half as good as Mu Jangyak. Well, it should be fine. The Valley Master of Summoning Sound, Hang Yeoriang, accepted Mo Harang of the Demon Fire Hall as her disciple, as per her original goal. Inwardly, she had been conflicted about Mok Yucheon like the Bright Blade King, Sun Yun, but to her, those from the righteous faction were detestable whether they defected or not. Therefore, she decided to stick to her original purpose. Unfortunately, Yom Jie of the Vermilion Slaughter Cave lost his life, so the remaining disciple, Yun Muung of the Esoteric Realm Gate, failed to achieve his goal and was chosen as a disciple by the Grand Elder of the Crimson Blood Sect, Dae So Man. Only the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon Clan, Bo Hyukso, returned empty-handed without any achievement. In this way, the entrance exam of Corpse Blood Valley ended safely. The disciples who were selected by the executives who came as observers at the closing ceremony left with them to their residences. Mok Jaeyonan also followed the Shadow Clan master, whom he had chosen himself. As they left Corpse Blood Valley, the Shadow Clan master said, "Oh ho ho. What a coincidence. I never thought I would accept a disciple who walks a completely different path from me." The Shadow Clan master's unique martial arts were Taoist techniques. On the other hand, the unique martial arts Mok Jaeyonan mainly practiced could be said to be sword techniques. Therefore, he was regretful about this aspect. At this, Mok Jaeyonan smiled and said, "I don't particularly distinguish between swords and Tao, so if you give me teachings, I can learn as much as possible." At those words, the Shadow Clan master spoke with delight. "Oh ho. Really?" "Yes. It requires a bit of a price, is that alright?" "A bit of a price? What does that mean?" As Mok Jaeyonan wondered, the Shadow Clan master covered his mouth with his hand and said coquettishly, "My unique martial arts have strong yin energy, so to learn them, you have to be castrated."